Was your spiritual awakening fun? What was your favorite part? Did a light switch go off and all of a sudden everything was roses and butterflies? Did you start to question why they didn't call Dark Night of the Soul Light Night of the Soul? For me, my spiritual awakening was absolutely nasty with a capital Nasty. In 2013, I lost my mom to cancer, and the very next day I woke up and was greeted with this gaping hole in my chest. And I realized that whatever little amount of love that I was feeling in this life was actually coming from my mom, and I could feel it. And the day she left, it was completely gone. And it forced me to evaluate my life and look at who I'd become. And I seen someone that had been abusing alcohol from the age of 19 to 33 at the time to escape all the childhood trauma and traumas I faced growing up, and that I never really liked it here. And I couldn't help but to ask myself, what was the point of this life that I was given? I realized very quickly that I no longer wanted to be here with the amount of pain that was in my heart and the way I was feeling. However, that was never an option for me. So for 13 months, despite the depression getting so bad that there was times I would try to get out of my chair and it would take me an hour to muster up the energy, I just continued to go through the motions of life. And 13 months later, I asked myself a question when I was sitting in my detached garage by myself that I never asked myself before. That question was, could you continue another 20 or 40 years feeling this way? And as soon as I did that, I got pretty angry, and I just started thinking about all the things I experienced. And eventually it got to a point where I just said to myself, I wish I could just exit this place. And that's when I heard a voice say, all you have to do is go start your car, come sit back down, and it'll all be over. And as soon as I heard that, it was like I was empowered about something for the first time since I lost my mom. I felt trapped. I looked at who I'd become. I seen this individual with a Jetwick temper that was angry, and my favorite way to resolve an issue with someone who had a problem with me was with the knuckle sandwich. And I just seen all this pain and all this healing that would have to take place that was basically impossible. And so the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. And for 45 minutes, it was like I was trying to justify, doing that. And the more I thought about it, the more angrier at God I became. And it felt more like I was, I was so connected to my soul. I didn't see myself as a body, and I saw it as something that was anchoring me into a reality that I never wanted to be in. So when I decided to, by starting my car in my garage, I grabbed my keys and I was just about to get out of my chair when I heard this voice shout at me, no. And, I was in a detached garage, door was shut, side door was locked. And this really startled me because even though I was looking at my car, from the time it took me to look where, like 1.5 seconds to look where this voice was shouting at me from, I was able to think two things. And that was, how did this guy hear my thoughts, and how is there a man standing in my garage? And when I looked over there at first, I didn't see anything, but then I started to see this wavy energy, and the energy of Archangel Michael came over me, and this voice started to continue shouting at me. And the really strange thing was that it sounded exactly like my dad, who was still alive, except the words sounded like they were being spoken from underwater. This really confused me because I started to think to myself, if anyone should be yelling at me, shouldn't it be my mom? Because she was the one who was gone and my dad was still alive. However, it would take me many months down the road to figure out that Archangel Michael had opened up a portal and allowed my dad's higher self to speak. One of the hardest things going through a spiritual awakening was realizing that the things I had been brought up to believe were not necessarily true. And, I was brought up in my family's religion, and I was 100% certain that I was right. I'm like, there's heaven, hell, and earth, and that's it. I knew nothing about oversouls, higher selves, and that was a bit of an ego death for me. So I really had to accept the fact that I had gone 33 years believing something that wasn't necessarily true. The next thing that was really hard for me in my spiritual awakening was understanding that the people that were close to me never really truly had my back. And, I didn't have any boundaries. And because of my upbringing, I allowed some people to treat me in a way that now I wouldn't even think twice about allowing someone to treat me that way and keep continuing to call them a friend or this or that, right? And so I realized that this healing journey that I had to go on was going to be an extremely lonely one. In 2019, after working with dozens of shamans and Reiki healers, I felt like I just started to get my head above water, and then that's when I went through my divorce, and it was like, holy cow. I must say my mentality was a lot different back then. If I had to go through similar things these days, it would be a much different story. But back then, I had a certain mentality, and I'd only advanced spiritually so much back then, right? Going through my divorce, I became extremely angry, and I wanted to more than in 2014 when I actually attempted to. However, Archangel Michael showed me that was no longer an option. So I started to take out my frustration for this life on my guides and angels. And eventually, I received a visitation from the soul of Jesus on October 20th, 2020, who came to me when I was having a shower at my old man's house and just cleared all this fog and confusion. And with that, unless you've had a visitation from the soul of Jesus like I have, it's very hard to understand what happens. I experienced clarity like never before, to the point where I started to have all these memories come back to me, not only of past lives, but just being a soul on the other side, in between incarnations, a little bit about who I was and some of the conversations I had with other angels before coming here. And I was actually shown that I told my guides and angels that this life path they had planned out for me was a very bad one. And they assured me, no, it's okay. You're going to be just fine. And, when I started to understand what happens to you when you exit this reality with such a horrible consciousness, I became infuriated. And from 2014 up until that point, I had been talking to Archangel Michael and saying, when I leave this place, you're going to have to help me hunt down the MFer who got me to incarnate here. And then I found out it was Archangel Michael who asked me to come here, and you could say I felt like I was sleeping with the enemy, and it took me at least 6 months of, going through some darkness to release all that and just center myself and become more focused. So, my spiritual awakening's been a bit of a doozy at times, and I must say, however, despite working with shamans for close to 10 years that were going behind my back and lying about me and slandering my name and sending me death spells to the point they would have their son jump off a building, one of the hardest things about awakening for me is not, working with Jezebel spirits that are trying to take you out. If you're on Team Demon, then, it is what it is. But for me, it was reaching out to the spiritual community, to the shamans, to the energy healers, to the Reiki healers that were helping people and spreading the word of Jesus. And then when I come along, I see a different side of these individuals, many of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, to the point where I'm just like, what's going on? There's so much spiritual ego out there. For me, I'm not innocent. I have spiritual ego, but I'm very authentic and I show it. I don't hide it. I don't pretend to be all love and light all the time. But, one of the things that was really hard for me was just reaching out to people that are good people. And then, maybe because of the things I've been shown, my teachings go against what they believe and it rubs them the wrong way. Or, I've experienced shamans that I've had ayahuasca ceremonies with that have just become extremely jealous of my journey because they see all these visitations from Archangel Michael and Jesus that I've had, and that leads them to start slandering my name and lying. And it's like, if you're on Team Light, like if you love Jesus, like I don't care what you call yourself, if you're spiritual or if you belong to a certain religion. One thing that I found out after becoming single in 2020 was many of the girls that I would go on dates with were Christian. And, there's different belief systems, and I personally don't care, but it blows my mind that, like, if you are a lover of Jesus, do you think Jesus would resent other people just because they don't belong to the certain group that you belong to? Or if someone teaches something a little bit different? One thing I realized after my visitation on October 20th, 2020, is that people don't really have any clue how much love Jesus has for himself, for everything, and for you. The very first time I experienced the energy of Jesus in a major way was actually not from one of his visitations. I was actually working on a sculpture, and any time that I would work on one of these sculptures, I would ask Archangel Michael and Jesus to place energy into them. And one day I was sitting there and I was like, Jesus or Yeshua, I was like, I always ask you guys to place some energy into these trees, and I have no idea if it's happening. It would be nice to have a sign. And it was like a drop of Jesus' energy touched me. And I remember sitting there with tears rolling down my eyes for 45 minutes. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I was just dumbfounded by this little drop of love. And on October 2020, I got a full Biggie size cup of it, and I remember the amount of love that surged through my body it's undescribable. I had my hands on my head when I got out of my shower and I was walking down the stairs, and I couldn't stop saying holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. And my dad was in the living room downstairs watching TV, and he turns it off and he's like, what's going on, why are you swearing? And I was just like, holy shit. And I'm like, I don't know what you're going to think about this, but the soul of Jesus just came to me when I was having a shower. And he was like, if the soul of Jesus just came to you, then stop swearing. But I've never felt so much love, and my mind was just blown. I was just like the next week, I would just burst out loud laughing for absolutely no reason other than the fact that my heart felt so amazing. However, I was just new into this divorce thing, and I was coming to the realization that a job I was working at for 20 years or so was no longer capable of supporting me while paying child support payments. And I was going through some things with my ex at the time, even though it's a lot more harmonious and peaceful and loving now. Back then it was a little rocky, to say the least, and it was very hard to hold on to that energy of Jesus. However, I just want to say, you love Jesus. I don't care what label you give yourself. You have to ask yourself, would Jesus hate on someone else that is a lover of Jesus just because they have a little bit of a different teaching or whatever? Maybe they're an old soul, whatever the excuse you give yourself to hate on someone. So my spiritual awakening has been nothing less than fun. Let me know in the comments down below, what was the hardest thing for you going through a spiritual awakening?